What's up, guys? Welcome to Rebellion. I'm clearly having some technical difficulties this morning, so I apologize for the delay, but we should be able to get started here in just a second. I've got us up on Facebook. We're also live on Instagram. We are also live on YouTube. And we've sent out another link for people who are in the course to be able to watch. Um, Apparently, my software here had changed a few methodologies. So we will be getting started here in about 5 minutes. In the meantime, if you have any questions or you guys are wanting to say hi, there is a chat link that's available on YouTube as well as Instagram and Facebook. We are not on TikTok today, but we are live on LinkedIn as well. So if you have questions or you want to chat with us, just let us know. If you are watching us on Instagram, I can't necessarily see you from unless I switch over. So I'll be doing that periodically from time to time. Throughout the presentation today, I'm going to be talking about a couple of different things. Mostly, what it is. What it is today is really around how to stop people pleasing or more. What is people pleasing? Because I think the first thing we have to do is kind of understand and recognize what are the patterns and what are the behaviors that we know that we engage in, and how does it all function within our scope of reality. So that's where we'll be getting started here in about 5 minutes. I'm going to let a few more people join, um, trying to getting these technological kinks worked out. But in the meantime, hi everyone. Wherever you're watching us from, we appreciate you. Um, Probably throw a little banner on here, and I did do a whole thing. So I changed a few things this round of the course. I bought it its own website, which I'll be putting up here, so you guys can find it pretty easily, um, as well as we created an entirely new thing for Boundary Bootcamp, which I'm excited to tell you guys about throughout the presentation today. So in the meantime, get that moving. Look at that. If you want to sign up or you're watching us live, here we are. If you're seeing us on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or wherever, you can go to rebel.thepeoplepleaser.com and you'll be able to get all of the information that we have available. Looks like we finally got our information out there. People are able to see us. If you're in the stage with us, and there's some of you that can actually see and possibly interact with me. That was actually an accident because I'm technologically adept. So, all that said, we'll give it about 5 more minutes and then get started. Hello from Sweden. Sweden, that's a long way. I was just in Sweden. I think it was Sweden. Yeah, that's right. I was in Sweden. Um, I was there on vacation. I popped into Copenhagen for the first time. Then I took the train over. Um, Pretty cool. Well, Delaney, welcome back. I know that old friend. Columbus, Ohio. Thanks for watching. And thanks, guys, for showing up. I really do appreciate your patience. Um, Anybody who's been a part of my Boundary Bootcamp can attest to technology not being my strong suit. Um, so, wow, Bangladesh, that's a long way away. Nick is in, Will, I am in Denver again. So I had moved to California and I have moved back to Denver. If it's the same Will Delaney that I think it is it the same Will Delaney that I think it is? If it is, I'll be seeing our mutual friend, um, Mark from California. There he is. Mark has been with me for a long time. Thank you, Mark, for I'm glad to see you're there. That means you got on. Um, but if that's the same Will Delaney that I know, then Will, I'll be seeing our mutual friend this week. Um, yes, and Romano, we did just get started. We haven't really started yet. Amy from Costa Mesa, California. Awesome to see you. I was just there all too recently. I lived there for about a year. I was in Huntington Beach though. So you watched me the first time because of the Red Sox hat. I appreciate you. Um, so I think that's probably enough of an intro. Looks like we've got about 50 people watching live on StreamYard. I don't know how many we have in the other places, but it looks like we are growing rapidly. So without further ado, hello from Vermont. A good friend of mine's from there. Without further ado, let's get started in rebellion. So I haven't taught this course in about 6 months, so it's going to be a little clunky here in the beginning as I get warmed up. But know that as we progress, I will be trying to answer questions as I can, as I see them on the right there. I'll try and pop into anything I can, and then at the end, if I have some extra time, I'll probably hang out and do a bit of a Q&A. So, all that said, let's get started. Welcome to Rebellion: How to Stop People Pleasing. I developed this course for a couple of reasons. I get the same questions very often from my coaching clients as well as on my channels about, what does it mean to be a people pleaser? And, how do I know if I'm doing that or if I'm just being agreeable? And I get questions about how do I stop and what are boundaries? And I really wanted to clear that up for people more than just to give you, the videos that I normally do, which are, I know, sort of in your face, and really calling you to the carpet, which is not what I always mean to do, but certainly not what I'm not meaning to do. So, that said, the reason for the course and the reason I built it out was to give you guys at least some insight into what the problem is on this first day. And then tomorrow, we'll talk more about how to solve it. I'll also tell you about midway through today about the Boundary Boot Camp that's coming up, sort of the sister class to this, or maybe even its big brother. And I'm pretty excited to launch that again. It's got a whole group component to it that's going to be very cool. And I'm very excited to bring that to you. So, all that said, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to talk about how to recognize people pleasing behaviors. I built this into a framework that I call resist. It's not great in terms of the Buddhist philosophy, resistance, because I should probably make it accept, but it is what it is. So, in the first step here, we want to really recognize what people pleasing behaviors exist. Then we want to move into this idea of enhancing our self awareness, which is to understand when and where we tend to do that. When you think of what I believe and when you see how people pleasing has affected my life and impacted a lot of my clients, one of the things I see in self awareness is the idea of honesty. And the very reason that we tend to people please is a dishonest modality, as I've mentioned. And one of the reasons we do that is self protection. So it's to understand and be aware of when we feel like we have to protect ourselves, right? Which brings us into the next section, setting healthy boundaries. As you know, I'm kind of a boundary machine. If you've watched my channel for very long, you know that anyway. And the one thing I will say about boundaries that I think is vitally important in my world is that I believe it is the key to all personal growth. Because if you can't learn to say no, if you can't learn to interact in healthy ways, if you can't learn to step away from situations, if you can't delineate what's for you and not for you, then you're going to have trouble breaking this pattern of people pleasing, right? So, or well, really anything. I mean, I couldn't have started a business without healthy boundaries. I couldn't have formed healthy relationships without good boundaries. I can't really accomplish much without good boundaries. So it's a really important component of this kind of people pleasing cycle. We need to talk more about that. In fact, it's the largest part in many ways. Which brings us to the next section. We'll go through this as well, which is the increasing of your self confidence. When we talk about self confidence, we're talking about what does it mean to deliver what you say you're going to deliver to yourself? Are you confident that you will do what you say you're going to do? And if the answer to that is no, that's not great, right? So you're not going to have a ton of confidence in that way if that's how you show up. Which then brings us to being more assertive, strengthening those assertiveness skills, and then finally we will talk tomorrow at the very end about how do you take control of your life, right? So all of these things are built in a system. I will give you some exercises to go through. If you haven't signed up for the coursework, go to the link that's playing below there, because inside of that, there's going to be some tests and some challenges that I think are very powerful and very cool. And we'll look forward to seeing your results there. So first things first, let's talk about how do we recognize people-pleasing behavior. So the tactics of the people pleaser. Usually we start with procrastination, right? It's really I don't know how that ended up. When you think about procrastination, submission to other people's opinions, relationship problems are sort of within that scope, right? We end up disconnected from our same-sex friends. We tend to live in a lot of fear-based living, right? So are they going to like me? Are they going to care? Are they more than that? Are they going to hate me, right? And you're always fixing or keeping the peace. right? So our people pleasing set is very conflict avoidance. They suppress their own emotions. And one of the probably the worst things that we do, it's actually outlined better than I do it by Dr. Robert Lever, who kind of conceptualized this, is the covert contract. It's giving to get, right? It basically states that if I can make everybody in the world around me like me, if I can be nice, if I can make them happy, then I will have a relatively trouble-free life. I'll get my needs met. Other people will be able to intuit and help me meet my needs, and then that's how that all works. Problem is that nobody knows about that covert contract, and it ends up causing a ton of resentment, right? So then we get into the repressed emotions, the chronic anxiety, the secrets and hidden behaviors, the compartmentalization. I love this one. Is like I see a lot of. I've had a lot of clients in the last few years that have had what we call emotional affairs, right? And what an emotional affair is well, I didn't have sex, so I'm not going to call it an affair. Well, if you were paying attention to somebody else beyond what you were paying to your spouse, then what we're talking about is cheating, right? But when you think in terms of how do you compartmentalize, imagine having to be totally honest with yourself and with other people. And that's where this gets, kind of mucky. And then, of course, we have the self sabotage, not living up to ourself or to our potential, and a lack of purpose and passion in life, which is not exciting. You want to think about, in terms of what does life mean? If you define life the way that I do, I believe that life is about love and adventure. And the key to love and adventure is honesty. So I see all you guys in here saying hi. Thank you for joining us, especially from, here in the United States and all over the world. I'm truly honored. It's crazy. um, so, like, I can't believe being impeccable. Mark Greenall commenting through Facebook says being impeccable with your word is radical honesty. I agree with that. Mark has been with me a long time. I want to thank Mark especially. Um, and guys, if you can, I want you to just say in the comments, thank you to our friend Jade Olivia, as well as Jeff Goins. They helped me put all this together today. And even though we had a bit of a technological hiccup, that's not a result of who they are. It's a result of who I am. They've been so helpful. So shout out to my friends for being so consistently and awesomely helpful. So moving on, let's talk about the consequences of people pleasing. Um, the first is increased stress and anxiety, right? When you're constantly trying to meet other people's expectations, it leads to this kind of stressed out, anxious way of being, right? And as an individual, you'll always be worried about what other people's opinions are. More than that, you'll be more concerned about what their opinions aren't, right? And that leads you into a very quick burnout type of situation where you're overcommitted, you're stretched too thin, you're satisfying others, and so you hit the peak of exhaustion, and that's where you start to become super resentful, right? And this resentment then shows up as a loss of identity. So when you're suppressing your own needs and desires and the opinions and all of your opinions, right, you're leading to this weakened sense of self and personal identity. And where that becomes a problem is you build on that and you're unable to create meaningful, lasting friendships because nobody knows who you are, right? Nobody can really speak to that inner part of you that's true. And when they can't do that, then you have these moments where you're like, well, nobody likes me, nobody loves me. And that's not accurate. What's true is you've been prioritizing others' needs over yours for so long that you ended up fostering this resentment and now they don't know who you are, right? So then when you go back and you try to do things like set boundaries, which most people don't know how to do and are generally not great at, it becomes a bigger problem, right? And that leads to a decrease in self-esteem, right? So you see how these all build on each other. You're relying on validation for self-worth, and that erodes the self-esteem system, and your entire individualized sense of self-worth, right? It's contingent on the approval of other people, and because you don't have the approval of other people, you have then trouble setting boundaries, right? And because you have trouble setting and maintaining effective boundaries, you end up being taken advantage of, which leads you to making even more poor decisions and then leaning on others or based on others' expectations, rather than the values and needs that you need, right? The things that are important to you. So that said, we're talking about a lot of regret and we're talking about a lot of dissatisfaction and overall life decisions that make things, brutal to be about, right? So, in the vein of more consequences, right? We have these, we end up in these inauthentic relationships, and very much they're often based on it's almost a reverse power dynamic where you're constantly giving and everybody else is constantly receiving, right? And it ends up creating this lack of depth in a person who's trying to constantly make other people happy, and it leads to like these superficial, unbalanced these relationships, and it's I liken it to being very transactional. So it's in this vein of like you always feel like you're giving, whereas many people, and especially in the people pleasing, end up saying, okay, well, when is it my turn? When do I get to play? Right. And the answer to that is when you decide to, right? Because you're the one who's in charge of these superficial dynamics and you're the one who's creating the imbalance. Right. And it's a hard thing to hear, but it's just the accurate truth. Um, we end up neglecting our personal needs pretty heavily as people pleasers. One of my very good friends, no, none of, to answer a quick question, no, you guys are not on camera. You're just chatting online. So you're good. I promise. I haven't put I'm not putting anybody on blast right this minute. Back to the presentation here. When we're talking about people pleasers, one of the core components of this behavioral modality or this kind of arc of behaviors is that you neglect everything that you need. So your personal health ends up suffering. The goals you want to chase end up suffering, or those goals don't end up actually being yours; they end up being other people's. And your well-being may be overall neglected due to the prioritization of the needs and desires of other people. So you end up giving away your money, you end up giving away your time, you end up never really standing up for what you need, and then you end up pissed off that nobody's giving you what you need. So, and because you're never asking, you put yourself in a position where, again, it's as simple as understanding that healthy people ask for what they want, right? Um, Speaking of asking for what I want, I'm going to slow down. I'm getting a sense that I'm talking very fast. Um, and I think I've made myself nervous because I had a bit of a technological hiccup. So, quick breath. Let's just fucking relax. All right. So, as we were, one of the core functions of the people pleasing set of behaviors is a strong difficulty in saying no, right? It's and more than that, it is an inability to say no that leads to like these overcommitments and taking on more than you can handle, and it results in like really high stress and decreased quality of life. But it's really not, in essence, a difficulty with the word no. It's a difficulty in not saying yes, and that's really important because you're not. It's not that you can't prioritize the word no. Um, it's when you don't say yes, you're filled with a pain, and you feel like everyone isn't gonna like you, right? So you end up saying yes to everything. I often say here and in my boundary boot camp that you don't have a no problem, you have a yes problem because your default response to everything is to say yes, right? And that leads us to a very high level of chronic fatigue, right? The constant effort to make everybody else happy. And it's just this persistent tiredness that shows up both mentally and physically um, that's damaging at your core, right? And at that point, you haven't been able to be authentic with anyone else because you've been kind of wearing this mask for so long that you end up suppressing your emotions entirely, right? People pleasers very often, when they hide their true feelings and avoid conflict, end up in this kind of emotional suppression triangle where and and it ends up sabotaging all of their potential happiness, right? And when you think about mental health issues like depression, these things start to show up And, I think there's a lot of forms of depression, right? You have your clinical depression, which is, very often kind of needs medication. And then you just have kind of a sadness at your core. And the sadness at your core is very often a result of suppressed emotion, right? Now, some suppression is good. Sometimes you do need to just grin and bear it. And not everybody needs to know when you're constantly in a state of trauma or whatever. You guys have seen my videos recently. You know what I'm about in that regard. Uh, so one of the things that you'll lose in this, of course, is your time, because you don't say yes, because you constantly prioritize other people. Um, your personal time ends up being consumed fulfilling other people's requests, right? And then you have no time for the things that I've talked about on the other page. Things like self-care, things like prioritizing your goals, things like spending time on youth, and things like enjoying your family. And that's where things get really out of control, right? Because you don't have to be anything to anybody, but you're constantly choosing to be everything to everyone. And it sabotages you in ways that are kind of impossible to overcome, right? So before I move on to enhanced self awareness, um, I want to talk about what it is to be a people pleaser and what it isn't. Um, So one of the core things that we run into in this vein, and I'll probably draw this a few times. Let's see. All right. Make sure that this is writing correctly. It's not backwards. All right, good. Perfect. So I can't see it great. I'm going to look at me, star of the show. Okay. So something I want to present that's not in my slides that I feel like is really important is the understanding of what is the opposite of people pleasing. So, Dr. Glover, who's a friend and mentor of mine, also says that the opposite of crazy is still crazy. And what does that mean? Well, it means that if you have people pleasing here, people pleaser on this side, and then on this side, you have an asshole. That's not what we're looking to find the balance between, right? So this is one of the core concepts, and people ask me this all the time, like, isn't the opposite of being a people pleaser being an asshole? Well, no. That's you're trying to find the tipping point between two toxic extremes. So what happens is we have to learn to, so rather than trying to be here in the middle of, these two awful ways of living, what we're trying to do when we try to stop people pleasing is we're going to level upward, right? We want to go to a place of kindness and integration. Plus integration. And above this line exists things like boundaries. Jesus, never spell in public. Um, we have honesty on over here, right? We have self-assertion, right? Or self-actualization, right? So one of the core concepts that you have to understand is when you're here, right, on this line, you're existing in a polarity. And polarities very often end up sabotaging you in more ways than one. One of the ways that being polarized does this is that you end up being a jerk when you don't need to be a jerk, right? So conceptually, the thing that I think is the most important about what it means to change the behavior is you have to look at the category as a whole, right? So if we go back to my little slide presentation here, let's go back to this guy. I'll just put myself at the top where I belong. Look at that, right? So when we think about, let's go back to burnout, right? Overcommitting, stretching oneself too thin, right? This is a result of. So how do we then fix this problem, right, of burnout? Well, the first thing we have to do is recognize we have it. Okay. which is what we're talking about when we talk about self-actualization or self-awareness, right? So moving on to that self-awareness category, man, I'm flying through slides today, so we may get to do some extra stuff. The first thing we have to really consider is being aware of ourselves in the moment. Bodily sensations, the thoughts and the feelings, all the emotions, right? And your relationship with yourself, right? It's this capacity to treat yourself with acceptance and kindness and compassion, and to view yourself as capable of achieving an established objective. So to behave genuinely and independently and to permit yourself to grow means to fully experience life in the present moment. Um, I don't like the way that looks. There we go. I like that better. I'm just going to jump around the screen until I figure out what I want. Um, that said, it's my presentation. I can do what I want. So just in terms of the principles of mindfulness, this is I stole this from John Zen or Dr. John Zen, but the first is non-judgment. Right? You can't play in a world. I say this a lot. Like if kicking your own ass was going to work, it would have worked already. And it's a really important thing that I've had to learn through both sobriety and trying to understand the world I live in is that if beating myself up was going to be effective, it would have been effective many years ago. And that always brings me back to this idea of a beginner's mindset. So I use this kind of framework in my own life. Um, every day I'm starting something new, and I'm going to learn something new every day, right? And the thing that I would say about that is if I'm going to learn every day, then everybody else is going to learn every day, which means failure is kind of impossible because if you're learning, you're growing, and most failure is just a learning modality. It's usually a data collection point where you just have to change course. And even in this thing that I'm doing today, I've had to change course a few times, right? I've had to make some corrections because, like it or not, I had technological problems this morning, right? So I could freak out, get pissed off, and think nobody's ever going to like me again. Or I can simply just correct the problem and then move on. So tomorrow will be slightly less bumpy because I now know what to do and I know how to do it better, right? Which brings me to trusting the process, right? You have to believe and trust yourself that you can overcome the things that have either happened to you or will happen to you over an extended timeline, right? So when you're trusting yourself in this regard, what does that mean? And then how do you actuate or actualize that into the non-striving behavior? Non-striving doesn't mean that you don't want to achieve. What non-striving means to me is that you are not focused on outcome. Um, when we think about outcome, what we create suffering because no matter what action you take, you can almost never control the output or the outcome of that action. Any number of things can get in the way. The butterfly effect, you could get hit by a train. Anything can go wrong, right? And anything can go right. So the only thing you can really do is set your sight on the work and doing it to the best of your ability, and then being patient, right? You also must accept and acknowledge what it means to be human, right? You will never be able to outthink or outrun all of the things that you need to do in a given day. You simply just have to do them to the best of your ability. And because of that, you won't be able to really accept how life shows up unless you get to this point where you are happy and comfortable with being who you are and knowing your own imperfections, right? I love being imperfect, right? Because I'm able to let go of that. I'm able to let be what's real in my life because I know me pretty well, right? I've spent a lifetime getting to know me. And the result of that has been pretty cool. So this is really important. So emotional intelligence. I actually like this diagram a lot for emotional intelligence. When you look at how this shows up for self and for others, right? So awareness is self-awareness, actions are self-management. Relationship management shows up in the others category under action, and social awareness shows up under others. There's another component to this that I like to show. When I think of emotional intelligence, I see it as a Venn diagram. We have our mind, our body, and our emotions. Mark, if you're watching, I know you're proud of how well I drew those circles. So we have our mind, right? When we do the thing, right? Mind, our body, our emotions. Here is what I call our danger zone. So the danger zone exists in between where the body and the emotional frame are basically reacting on each other. Okay. So I've mentioned in many videos over time that people pleasing is also runs parallel in many regard to um, addiction. And this is one of those parallels because in the danger zone for the addict, what we have here is usually a relapse. Okay. It's where your body feels a thing, your emotional frame then makes a decision as to what it is, and they bounce back and forth until your body's overwhelmed and you have to do something in order to make it go away or to medicate it, right? This is also where people pleasing very often shows up, right? So if you think of the first time you were ever going to kiss somebody you liked, or if you were ever doing something romantic, right? You're going to get a feeling probably, for me, it shows up in the guts, kind of, they call it the butterflies in the stomach. Um, and then, and you let that just kind of sit, kind of remember what that was, and you smile. And then I want you to think about the last time you thought you were going to die, right? Probably shows up in the stomach. You don't call it butterflies, you call it anxiety. But the feeling is usually, pretty close to the same, if not entirely identical, which means your emotions happen in the body first, and your emotion then gives them context, right? Your feelings almost always either generate or are a result of thought, right? So the thing you can do to override people pleasing when you start to get this kind of awful feeling in your gut um, is to ask yourself, what am I believing? Right? I'm believing I have to please everybody. Right? I'm believing that if I don't do this thing, nobody will like me anymore. I'm believing any number of damn things, really. Doesn't really matter what you come up with, right? But the next thing you have to ask yourself is, how am I reinforcing that belief? Right? Well, I'm about to go to lunch that I don't want to go to. I'm about to take on more tasks than I need to. I'm about to say yes to a birthday party that I don't want to go to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The next question, of course, and these are all outlined in the coursework that you can see below, rebel.thepeoplepleaser.com. You can just go there and you'll get all of this. It's all written down for you. What you'll see is that through this, you can then ask yourself, what would I prefer to believe? Right? I prefer to believe that I'm not for everybody, and that's okay. Right? And in that case, you then have to ask the question, what do I need to do to reinforce that belief? Like, that it's okay if I'm disliked. It's okay that I don't have this energy. It's okay for me to be me. And the answer to that would be, don't go to the party, don't go to lunch, don't take on the extra task, and then you move on with your day, right? But what this is doing, so this feeling will generate a thought, and that thought is almost universally that I'm not good enough, right? And I know that's the thought because I've had the thought hundreds, if not thousands of times. And it's completely sabotaging at its core. And it will make you miserable and it will make you unhappy. And there's no reason to live like that. So, going back to our presentation, when we talk about emotional intelligence, let me go back to our little slide here. Let's see, Rebel. Let's see. You may have missed. Hang on. I'll check the link really quick. Oh, yeah, it's still there. I think it's correct. So far as I know, rebel.thepeopledispleaser.com. Um, maybe don't put the www in front of it. Here, let me change that. Well, let's see. hide that. There we go. Rebel.thepeopledispleaser.com. Yeah, that's the one. Um, there you go. So moving on. As we think about emotional intelligence, we're talking about four quadrants: the self-awareness, the social awareness, the self-management, and the relationship. When we're functioning in our internal locus of control, we're only focused on self, right? Which means we need to be self-aware and we need to be in the mode of self-management, right? And that's what we just talked about in my Venn diagram, which is what do I need to do in order to increase my feeling of well-being? And very often that means saying no, which immediately doesn't feel like it's going to make you feel better, but very often it does. Um, this one is a result of my good friend Morgan, who helped me put this together. Her explanation of understanding the trains of thought is interesting, and I've left it in here. But the thing I want to kind of put out here for you is that your emotions and your thoughts are not enemies, and if you can stop demonizing them, what will happen is you'll be able to start getting curious, right? Um, and every thought that pops in your mind, right, is one that you get to either choose to be with or you get to choose to let pass. Um, One of the ones, so at the beginning of the presentation today, I felt like I was talking very fast and I could recognize even in my own body that I was feeling kind of nervous. And I think that was a result of my having some technology problems. And, of course, when I come on here, I want you guys to like what I'm doing, right? Ultimately what happened was I saw it, I felt it in myself and went, "Oh, okay. I don't really want to be nervous, so I'm just not going to be that. And I'm going to let that thought pass, and I'm just going to own that moment." And the way I did that was to say, "I feel like I'm nervous and I'm going too quickly. I'm going to slow down and I'm just going to take my time with all of this." Right? So the result, of course, being that now here we are, talking about this in a much calmer way. And I feel pretty good about it. So um, when you when you get into your own personal identity, right, the first thing you have to understand is your values, right? I value success as an example. What do I want? What do I want to want is probably the more important question. So if somebody asks you, "What do you want?" Uh, that's a tougher question. Then, and it's generally not nearly as deep as what do I want to want, right? Because if I ask somebody what they want, they're going to say they want a good job. They're going to say I want to make $1 million. They're going to say whatever kind of source energy they think they have to channel to be successful in whatever regard that is. But when I say what do you want to want, right? That's gonna beg the question, what are you prioritizing? Right? And then what do you want to prioritize? If you prioritize that, how does that affect other people? Right. So if I ask myself, what do I want to want? I want to be able to travel um, consistently. I want to be free to enjoy my business. I don't want it to get too big because large in scale doesn't always mean effective in um, in my world. And so when I start to think in the vein of like, what do I want to want versus what do I want, I then have to really look at how do my value systems line up with it, right? So Ramana in the thread here said, I want to be at total peace with myself, no matter how messy and imperfect in any situation. What a beautiful way to want to be, right? I want to want that, right? But I think the curiosity I always have, especially with my clients in my one-on-one practice, um, and now through Boundary Boot Camp, which by the way is launching again in the coming days, you have to start asking the bigger questions, right? Um, so somebody said you want to remain in control. Actually, I think more than anything, I would be okay if I lost control. I would be okay if um, so there's a more in the vein of like, what do I want my company to look like? I'll get into that later. But I think losing control is actually or not necessarily losing control because it sounds crazy, like I'm just on a train and I, release the brake. But I think recognizing of what I'm in control, which is almost nothing. You're in control of your thoughts and sometimes your actions. Um, and that's about it, right? You're almost barely in control of your body, right? So if you really want to be more, um, you have to you have to be less. It's kind of a weird paradox, but it's true. It's like you have to let go of that which does not serve you, and you also have to be willing to understand what is within your scope of control and what isn't. Um, Not a lot in the world is in your scope of control, and that's why this question is so powerful. It's like the identification of what do I actually want, right? This is one of my favorite slides because it speaks to something that I have discovered all by myself. So, hooray for me, which is self invention is better than self discovery because self discovery is a myth. You don't know who you are because who you were was never allowed to invent it. Let me say that again for effect. Self discovery is a myth. You don't know who you are because who you were was never allowed to invent it. So many of the people pleasing clients that I have, Mark, thanks for coming. So many of the people pleasing clients that I have, so many of the people that have attended my boundary boot camps, grew up in environments where they were never allowed to play. And if you look at what children are doing, okay, so many people think that when children are playing, they're playing. They're not playing, they're learning. They're testing the boundaries of life. They're figuring out what hurts and what doesn't hurt. They're figuring out all of the things within the life structure that they can and cannot do. So that learning and that invention of self is what's required to become fully actualized as an adult. If you were never allowed to play, then you were never allowed to invent yourself, right? So what does it take to invent yourself, right? Rather than trying to discover who you are, you have the opportunity to invent who you are, right? What would you like to try? What do you want to experience, right? You can identify as someone who enjoys new experiences and you can begin to craft a persona of who you want to be, right? Not what everyone else wants you to be, but what do you want to want? And I love that idea, right? It's the idea of self invention over self discovery. It's changed the way that I show up in the world. Because I used to think that I was lost, man. I think a lot of people did. They kind of lived in this kind of I'm lost headspace. And you're not lost. You're just trying to figure out who you are. Well, figuring out who you are means trying new shit, right? And it means failing and it means not winning at everything. And yeah, Joel, you can be the man you want to be. I love that. Here, let me show that. Yeah, of course you can. You can absolutely be the man you want to be. You can be any man you want to be. It's one of these harder things too. Is like you can be anything in life you want, but you can't be everything you want, right? So you do have to make some choices. Um, but at the end of the day, that's how it looks, right? So in terms of setting healthy boundaries, um, this is one I want to save until tomorrow, but I'm going to cover it. I think I'm going to cover this. I'm going to cover this whole show, this whole slideshow now, because I kind of want to. And then tomorrow I'm gonna change it up. We're gonna do some more stuff. So when we think about healthy boundaries and the resist um, functionality and this kind of mm, what does it mean to take over your life, right? Boundaries are a skill set, right? They are not something that are inherent to a lot of us, right? So it's about understanding your personal limits, right? This is what most people feel boundaries are, and they're not wrong. It's identifying your own mental and physical and emotional needs in a way that allows you to delineate what you'll accept and what you will not accept, what you will tolerate and not tolerate. Um, so communication skills, of course, are vital in the boundary conversations, right? How you communicate will determine the effectiveness of your boundaries, right? You have to be calm, you have to be assertive, you have to know what you want. You have to, you also have to know that you don't need the permission of other people to have boundaries, right? Um, you determine your energy and what you're going to do and how you stick to that. Thanks. Thanks, pal. So yeah, if you guys haven't liked this, please do that. It helps me a lot. And we'll make everybody else able to see this, right? So, and then we have the idea of learning to listen actively rather than defending your position as you kind of move through your boundaries, through your boundary journey. And that's the long game, right? You want to keep the important people around you that you love, and you want to let some of the other people maybe go away, and that's all fine. The result of having good boundaries is, you know, sometimes you'll lose some people, but very often they'll circle back, right? Um, if you're in the actual broadcast, no, there is no like button. But if you're watching on Instagram, if you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on LinkedIn, if you're watching on any of the other platforms, please hit the like button. It does help us with our algorithmic growth. Um, conflict resolution is also kind of a massive piece of what are boundaries, right? We don't set boundaries with other people. People bump up against our boundaries, and it creates conflict. Um, and when we have to decide with whom, when they do that, rather, we have to decide with how much force we're going to push back, right? And that's not one size fits all. It's like imagine um, your kid throws a temper tantrum at the mall, and you pick him up and you punish him, in a meaningful way. It's not the same thing as if an adult was to, throw a stapler at your head. It's you have to react differently based on situational awareness, and that brings us to the idea of self awareness and self reflection. It's like if somebody really bumps up against your boundaries first, that's a you problem, not a them problem. Um, Meaning you have to be willing and able to have that conversation. And then you have to engage in some self-reflection to understand your own needs, right? Your needs, your values, your priorities, and that informs the creation of as well as the enforcement of appropriate boundaries, right? It's assessing your boundaries and reflecting on your own needs and values. It's understanding what they are, and then it also means that your boundaries will change over time, right? They're not set in stone, but I like to say they're more like a jello mold. um, too often people think that boundaries are this kind of concrete-esque way of living, and that's almost entirely inaccurate. So because some things, and especially if you're thinking in the and we'll say the romantic interpersonal realm or in the bedroom, some things that you like now you may not like later, or some things you like later you may not have liked immediately. So boundaries do change, and it's okay that that's true. you know um, and you have to give yourself permission to kind of be flexible in that way. Saying no is the center to the coursework. So you need to understand that as a component of that, um, this is where life gets pretty easy, um, but it's exceptionally hard in the beginning, right? And it's around understanding that you don't have a yes problem, you have a no problem. And then we need to function, of course, in some empathy and compassion. So while I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I need to take a quick break from reading, and my eyeballs are starting to get a little squishy. What kind of questions do people have? I'm open for questions for the next couple minutes. Questions, thoughts? All right. Nothing. All right. So I'm going to take a quick break. I've been talking for just about an hour. So I'm going to get a drink of water. I'm going to stand up and stretch, and then I'll be right back with you. So let me put up an intermission here. Intermission. And What's up, guys? Look at me making the most of the technology here. Um, Thank you for being part of the out of our rebellion. How to stop people pleasing. We're going to go back into boundaries just now. I appreciate you. Let me take a quick break there. Gets a little exhausting talking for 50 minutes at a time. So, as you may have noticed, we're running way ahead of time, which is really cool because that means tomorrow I get to go deeper into this presentation and open up the floodgates of what's possible. It also means that I'm going to be doing a bit of a question and answer here live today around what is people pleasing and kind of an ask me anything section. But first, I want to talk a little bit about Boundary Boot Camp which is relaunching. It's my program that is kind of an accompaniment to this one. And what I really love about it um, is the way that it helps other people start to um, become more aware of what are their gaps in coverage and what does it mean to be happy, right? And how do they start taking their lives back? So, anybody that's on this call now or anybody that's watching live, the Boundary Bootcamp is now open for enrollment. And you can get that by going to myboundarybootcamp.com. You can learn everything you want to from there. But without further ado, let's get started back to where we were. All right. So, boundaries are a skill set. What is going on? Oh, I'm going to remove that background. Hold, please. There we go. Boundaries are a skill set, right? First things first, we have to understand our personal limits, right? This is I started to talk about this. I want to talk about it a little bit more. When we're identifying our own mental and physical and emotional needs, it's vital to understand and process those. But it's also vital to understand the process itself. So one of the core concepts that I teach in my boundary boot camp that I think is really valuable is understanding what a boundary is and what a boundary isn't. So a boundary is not a rule book for other people. It is actually a delineator of how you show up in the world. And it delineates for you what you will accept, what you will not accept, what you will tolerate, what you will not tolerate. So I was asked here by a LinkedIn user if I could give a specific example of how to start creating boundaries in the workplace setting. You're right. It's starting as difficult. So this is a really good example. And I'm going to just start doing this kind of ad hoc as we go through. If I see any good questions, the only thing I ask, oh yeah, my intermission sticker is still up. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate you. The only thing I ask is that you put questions or question in the, there we go, in your ask there. So if you have a question for me and you're watching live on either Facebook, Instagram, or you're actually in the chat with us, I can answer those questions here, and I'll be doing some of that. So the first thing about setting boundaries in the workplace is that you have to understand. It still says intermission on it too. I am just having all kinds of fun. There we go. So the first thing you have to understand about setting boundaries, especially let's go with the workplace, right? Is that you have to be certain that you are not stepping outside of your role, right? So it's not a boundary, for instance, if you're a software engineer to have to write code, that's not a boundary that you can express. That's your job, right? So it's kind of a sticky situation. Where boundaries become kind of an issue at work very often is um, people asking you to help with other things, getting you involved in projects that aren't yours. And the first thing you have to learn to say is no, no, I'm not doing that. So the challenge in that is understanding internally that you don't have a problem with yes, you have a problem, or you don't have a problem with no, you have a problem not saying yes. And that's a result of, probably some conditioning from childhood and forward, but it doesn't mean that, it does, you have to learn to tolerate other people's uncomfortable emotions, right? You have to learn to accept that not everybody's going to like you, right? And that's one of the big things about work, very specifically, right? So when we think about communication skills and in the boundary sphere, this is really important to that question, like how do I set boundaries at work? How you communicate will determine the effectiveness of your boundaries. You need to be calm and you need to be assertive. You need to know that you don't need permission from others to have boundaries, but you have to determine for yourself what you're willing to spend your energy and time on and then stick to that, right? So this is a great one, and I'm going to answer that one too. Claire, I'll come right back and I'm just start that so I can see it. Um, Learning to actively listen when you start to communicate boundaries rather than defending your position is vital, right? Because as you move through this kind of boundary journey, which I don't love the word journey, but it is what it is, you need to understand that this is a long game. You aren't good at this, right? And knowing that you're not good at this means that you have to allow some time to build the skill set. And through building that skill set, you're going to become more honest, you're going to become more forthright, and you're going to get better and better at doing this over time. So, Claire's question was, how do I stop feeling like a burden to people when you do set boundaries and do not people please? I'm a slow typer. Well, Claire, I appreciate you letting us know. Um, this is one of probably the most core things that we talk about through the Boundary Boot Camp. And let me express it this way. Um, Initially, you need to realize that you're not feeling like a burden first. It's not that you feel it's that you feel more, how do I say this? Without being, you know what, I'm just going to be who I am. It's not that you're feeling like a burden, you're feeling uncomfortable. And you have an inability to tolerate other people's negative emotions. That's what people pleasing is. It is the inability to tolerate other people's normal negative emotion. You don't want them to feel bad. It's not that you feel like you're a burden, right? And if you're setting your boundaries appropriately, how could they be a burden? Right? Because a boundary is not about anybody else. It's not a rule book. It's not a guideline for how they live. It's a guideline for how you show up, right? So I would be more curious to know what kind of boundary it is that's making you feel like a burden. But realistically, um, I don't think that's what the issue is. I think what's really happening for you is that you don't know how to tolerate when people don't like what you have to say. So, um, you'd be a great candidate for the thing I'm about to put on the screen here. So, here we go. So, going back to our questions here, and thanks, Josh. That's a pretty awesome, resounding endorsement. Um, Cindy, this is a good one. If you can't find the slides, guys, you have to be um, logged into the system. The system, of course, is at rebel.thepeoplepleaser.com. So, moving on. So, active listening. When we're talking about this, and we've already done a little bit on this, but remember that as you move through your boundary journey, you do need to be able to listen to other people's concerns and help them to navigate this new version of you. It's not, there's no person on earth that's going to be better at your boundaries than you. And you need to not expect that from them. Right. So, in the vein of that, we need to learn really effective conflict resolution. Right. We do not set boundaries with other people. Let me say that again. You do not set boundaries with other people. Boundaries are set within yourself. They're built on your Bill of Rights and they're about your value systems and what you need, right? So when you set your boundaries on values rather than other people's feelings, right? Then you have the idea that, okay, so what happens when somebody bumps up against my values, right? We're coming up on the holiday season. We have two very specific ones coming up. If you're not in the United States on Thanksgiving, I generally refer to Thanksgiving, historically speaking, as fight night. That's where your drunk Uncle Rob is going to do something stupid, or your sister's going to, bring drama, or your brother's going to be a jerk, or somebody's going to get drunk. It's just kind of a nightmare. But when you think about what are my boundaries, so an example of this is I do not spend time with people who are um, unkind. So if I'm in an environment where somebody's being unkind, or they are unkind to me for no reason, or if they're unkind to somebody that I see, or whatever, I'm happy to say out loud, listen, I don't spend time with people who act like this, so I'm going to step away, and we can reconvene this later, or perhaps not, right? And that's not me being a jerk so much as that's just me standing up for what I believe is right. Um, so there's that component. Rob asked an interesting question here. Speaking of drunk Uncle Rob, didn't mean that, bro. How do you stop feeling bad or guilty for saying no? In the same respect, feeling guilty for saying yes. um, Again, it's not guilt. Um, it's discomfort. I've never felt guilty for saying no to something that I didn't want to do. Um, and neither have you. What you felt is discomfort at other people's reactions or the emotions that are accompanying that no. Um, so you we subscribe it to guilt very often because we don't want to take responsibility for the idea that we've tried to be everything to everyone, and you can't be everything to everyone, right? I'm glad you like that, Sherry. Reconvene later, or perhaps not. um, so, Rob, initially you're going to feel bad, right? It's not, but don't prescribe that to guilt, right? That it's just you feel bad, you feel uncomfortable, right, for saying no, and in the same respect, you feel bad for saying yes. It's not an internal struggle either. What it um, is you have to recognize that you just don't like other people's normal um, negative emotions, and you have to learn to tolerate those, and that does come with time, right? I let's see. Nicole, you had a question. I have daycare. I have set boundaries with parents and children often. It's a challenge for me. Yeah, I imagine so as a daycare worker or owner. That would be even worse, right? I don't know who EN is, but I will say this: not spending time with people that are unkind means not spending time with anyone. Basically, I disagree. There are people that will be unkind from time to time, but being unkind from time to time is not the same as being an unkind human. And I think we know what those delineators look like. So, I don't tend to engage in that kind of thought process where it's like all or nothing, because boundaries are not all or nothing, and neither is learning how to not be a people pleaser, right? So, learning to say no. Saying no is the center of the course, right? Except in your homework. Consistently saying yes to everything has turned into a plague in your life, right? When your default answer should actually be no to most things, so you have time to focus on what matters to you. This is a really important thing, because Charlie Unger, who is a colleague of Warren Buffett, outlined that the reason that they were able to be so successful wasn't because they said yes to a lot of things; it was because they said no to a lot of things, right? And that changes the way that you see the world. Um, so this comes back to the idea that if your default answer to everything is yes, then your no is meaningless, and the only thing that means less than your no is your yes. So, do you want your word to be meaningful? And if you do, are you prepared then um, to do whatever it takes to make it meaningful? Which would mean saying no. It's a really challenging concept, right? So, another good question that I'll get to in just a second. Jeff Kate, I see you. So I'm going to answer that in just a moment. Um, Having good boundaries is not about being a jerk, right? You are not going to you're not going to make the world at large subscribe to your fire-branded book of do's and don'ts, right? This means that you have to practice empathy and compassion as other people adjust to your new way of living, right? If you give those people a chance, if you want them in your life, you have to be willing to sometimes explain your boundaries, sometimes give people grace to adjust. Sometimes you have to just turn the relationship volume down, right? It's not about cutting people out of your life, right? So the final point that I would make in the boundaries situation is like as you start to move down this road, um, celebrate your wins. And that means patting yourself on the back. It means learning to give yourself the gift of love. It means asserting your own values, right? Um, so I'm going to answer this question, Jeff. This is a really good one. I'm going to show that one. Um, for, I struggle with this with the idea from the requester's point of view. They are usually asking reasonable requests, and I'm not understanding the bigger picture. So I don't want to say no. Is that still people pleasing? That defines people pleasing, right? Um, the request requests made of you and your time, whether reasonable or unreasonable, is irrelevant, right? Whether they're reasonable or unreasonable is wildly irrelevant because the the issue isn't whether it's reasonable, it's whether you want to do it or whether you have the appropriate amount of time or whether you have the resources to engage, right? It's not about, well, that's a pretty reasonable request. Almost everything you could ask in life is going to be reasonable, Jeff. Nobody's going to be like, hey, can you jump off a mountain? Right? Nobody's going to be like, hey, when you decide to go parasailing, would you light yourself on fire? That's not the requests that people are making. It's the everyday. Like, do you want to come to my birthday party? Do you want to help me with this project that I know is going to overrun your time? Are you willing to do this thing for me? That's usually what it is. So almost all requests that come through are going to be reasonable. Having boundaries is the ability to say yes or no based on your capability and based on how much you have in the tank, right? So if you have nothing left in the tank, right, reasonable or not, the answer needs to be no. I hope that makes sense. Um, I don't know what concept you're asking me to dive into. Um, let's see. This is a great question. Is it Michael or Mikhail? I don't know. How can you figure out your values and turn them into healthy boundaries? For most of the time, I'm not sure. You guys can see the question. There is a roadmap to developing the self awareness. I actually talk about it a lot in my boundary boot camp, which is is on sale now at myboundarybootcamp.com. But figuring out your values and your boundaries, it's a longer road, right? Something that I can't cover in 3 hours. But I will say to you, or in 2 hours, I will say that one of the first things that you have to do is identify what serves you and what doesn't serve you, and then secondarily, you need to really start understanding what is the kind of life that you want to invent. So if I go back and we start to look through, like, if I was to imagine myself in a certain way of being, right? Um, yes, Sarah, it's all about finding your values and finding your value. Um, if I was to go back and look at how I created my own value systems, I started by asking myself, who do I want to be? Because there are four people that play around in the mind of a people pleaser. There's who you are, who you want to be, who you think you are, and who you think you want to be. Those last two idiots need to shut up so you can get the first two communicating, which is who are you and who do you want to be. When I ask myself, who do I really want to be? I had to really, so it's like, okay, I want to see this in my world. I want to see that in my world. And then the question you ask around values is like, how would I have to show up in order to accomplish those things? Right? What would it look like if I showed up bigger than what I'm showing up now? Um, and uh, through that, you start to understand that you have to say no. You have to become more empathetic. You have to start really thinking about who do you want to be, right? Um, this is Nicole. I'm going to answer that question in just a minute. There, I saw a great question come through because I think it's really important. But in the boundaries vein, this is what you're talking about um, in this, Jeff, is adaptability, right? Your boundaries will change over time, so will you, right? Which means being adaptable and flexible is what's going to keep you from constantly trying to enforce your values that no longer serve you, right? So what I might have valued 5 years ago, I don't value today because as you mature, your values change, right? People change over time, and you have to be willing to allow that in yourself and other people. Which brings you to this kind of idea of resilience and perseverance. We live in probably in the least resilient or you know time imaginable. I think people have become. I think they become emotionally unstable. I think they're very fragile, and that's not something that will hold for you, right? You have to develop some resistance and some resilience to be able to face off the criticism from these boundaries. So I'm getting questions like, how do I stand up for my boundaries? Well, first things first is you start standing up for your boundaries. And are you always going to be great? No, you're gonna fail a lot in the beginning. But you have to be able to do that, right? Because staying committed to your self care and your personal principles is how you create the life that you want, right? And it's this resilience in doing that. So somebody bumps up against your boundaries, maybe you maybe you screw it up, right? Or maybe you don't. But one way or the other, you celebrate the win because you saw it, you felt it, you knew what to do. Maybe you didn't quite do it. Maybe you did quite do it. Maybe you overdid it. Maybe there's a million ways that can go wrong, but it is what it is, right? So, oop, I hit the wrong button. One of the core things that we learn in the Boundary Boot Camp, as well as here, is that boundaries are not rules, right? And you may occasionally need compromise, right? Remember, there's a difference between a deal breaker and a boundary. And we do discuss both a little bit later. But as we go through that, we need to understand like how does the communication pattern break and what does all that look like? Which brings us to this idea of prioritization and time management and setting boundaries around the commitments and prioritizing activities and aligning with your personal goals, like all of this stuff. There's a really long question. I'm probably not going to get to that. Please email that to info@nickpollard.com. So consistency, boundaries based on your value systems require consistency because without it, you develop a lack of confidence in what you stand for, right? You have to be willing to speak up no matter when necessary to remain true to how you hold yourself. And this is more important for you than it is for others as it leads to self-trust, right? And self-trust is the definition of self-confidence. So, Nicole, I want to answer your question because it looks like an important one. I have a daughter who's chronically sick. How do you share your concerns with a doctor when they tell you they are going to go home and I know, or that she's okay to go home and I know that she is not? I don't want to be the difficult parent. Well, I would say this. If you don't feel like your daughter's ready to go home, the answer is she's not ready to go home. I heard this very recently. Where did all of this go? Oh, my goodness. We got to go all the way back here. There we go. Consistency. Uh, Somebody said to me the other day, and I get asked this a lot, especially when I piss people off. What are my credentials? Well, my credentials are that I've lived a life that has been really, really challenging, and I've had to figure out how to become less of a people pleaser, and I've had to create boundaries, and I figured out a way to systematize that, and it works for me, and it works for a lot of other people, and that's my credentials. Um, but I said in that vein, you don't have to be a doctor to question your doctor, right? And if you're feeling like a difficult parent, then maybe it's time for you to be a difficult parent, right? And uh, not everybody gets to like you, so maybe don't worry so much about that, right? Um, so all that said, that would be my first thing, right? So boundary setting strategies, I talk more about this, but they are guidelines for how you show up in the world. And you do not have to have 1,000 conversations with everyone you know. You simply have to determine how you will spend your time and stick to that. And then we have self confidence. Right? So we are also going to talk about the types of boundaries: physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, mental boundaries, material boundaries, social boundaries. Like all of this is within that frame. So we've reached an hour and 20 minutes. I'd like to answer a few more questions. Um, and then I'm going to take a quick break because I, I'm boundaried and I need to take a quick break. So, um, what other questions do we have? I have a very long question here that I won't be able to get to. Um, let me see what I see on Instagram. All right. So, see a couple of questions on IG. IG folks, I don't see your questions. If you want to ask questions, it's probably best that you jump over to either YouTube or Facebook. As much as I love IG, they are generally not great at the live thing. So that said, if you want to watch this more, if you want to be able to interact with us, hop on there and you should be able to have a little bit more luck. And I'm going to change the screen here. So let's answer some questions, shall we? Here's a good one. I wanted to take part in traveling. Will there be a place to watch later? Yes, there will. You should receive an email with a login to the website. I actually built this as an actual course. So I will be loading these videos there, and then they will also be uploaded to, or they will be also uploaded to YouTube for you to be able to watch if you choose to do it that way. So one way or the other, you'll be able to watch this. Hi, Dan from Saskatchewan. Nice to meet you. Let's see. Not sure what that means. Oh, yeah. I know what you mean. All right. So that's a question. Here we go. How to say no if since someone I don't know. Yikes. Ramana, I don't know what you're asking me there, buddy. I'm gonna let you try that one more time. Is there an age where improvement can happen? I, yeah, I mean at any age, I think. Self improvement can happen from birth till death. Um, oh, where it can't happen? No, probably not. I think anybody is able to improve. There's certain things you can't improve upon. Um, you can like narcissistic personality disorder, for instance. Excuse me. NPD can't be solved, but it can certainly be helped, right? So you can treat it, but you can't ever resolve it. You can't ever cure it. So can you change that? No. Same with sociopathy. Same psychopathy. Same. Um, so emotionally, probably, or kind of mentally, there's that. Like mental illness is different than disordered thinking or cognitive biases or even cognitive distortions. So I think that's one of the core concepts that needs a little work. Question shortened. Here we go. Um, what's the key to letting go of overthinking interactions, even when they're successful? Um, well, first things first. Let's write them down. Um, Overthinking is a weird word because it's not really that. It's ruminating. And very often we don't ruminate on the positive. We ruminate mostly on the negative. If we're ruminating on the positive, we're generally celebrating. So um, you're not actually positively, projecting. You're almost always ruminating on what could have been. So the first thing I would say is write it down. If you get into an interaction, it goes particularly well or poorly, whatever the case is, and then you have a feeling about it or you just can't let it go, sit down with a journal and just write it out. Because one of the things is just stuck in the echo chamber of your head and it's making you crazy. So that's me in the echo chamber going crazy. Um, Write it down, take a look at it, and then ask yourself if you're in control of the outcome. The answer is almost going to be universally no. Um, so that would be my answer. Just write it down and ask yourself the appropriate questions. Jeff Creed, and post burnout, simple recharge methods. How to recharge the battery when you are burned out? That's easy. Um, delete all your social media would be the first thing I would do. Um, first and foremost. So you're probably focusing on things that are inside of yourself rather than outside of yourself. If you're feeling burned out, you're probably thinking an awful lot about what you're thinking. Um, so my first suggestion would be to go out and do something altruistic. Maybe go serve people, um, to go and recharge the battery. I'm a person that believes that service helps us grow, and I don't mean service in the pleasing way. I mean service because we enjoy it and we want to be genuinely kind to others. And by doing that, the most important thing you will accomplish is learning, how to be better and do what you want to do. So um, that would be my answer to that: is get out and serve other people. Maybe go to a soup kitchen. Donate some time at the Goodwill. Um, go be a crossing guard. I don't know, something that gets you with other people and helps you to realize that humanity's not out to get you, right? Romana, someone gives you a compliment or asks you a question in the gym, for example, and it has a sexual undertone and it's not welcomed on my side. I'm either very strong or not at very certain. So listen, if somebody's violating your sexual boundaries or if somebody's violating your personal space, that's more of a hard limit for me than it is a boundary. And I think the only thing you can do in that way is express that you do not appreciate the advance. Um, you know, and I know what I'm going to hear next is like, that's hard to do. Well, yeah, of course it is. You're a nice person, so the thing would be if they're willing to approach you, then they were willing to get rejected. That's part of the social contract. And so that said, um, that's how it's going to show up. Right. So I would just say to them, I don't appreciate this, and I'm unwilling to engage further. That would be my answer to that. Hope this helps. um, Jeff, I'm not sure if you're serious about that, but love your buddy. Um, is there a way to deal with a narcissist other than no contact? Sometimes I feel guilty about walking away, even though I know it was really good for me mentally. The first and foremost is that you need to be cognitively aware of whether the person is actually a narcissist. This is probably the most overused buzzword in the entirety of humanity right now. Everybody thinks everybody's a narcissist. So I'd be very careful about that as a diagnosis. Um, the the walking away from, I think, how do I say this? People don't have to be awful for you not to want to spend time with them. And I think that's a really important thing that I'm just kind of thinking of now. Um, you don't have to just walk away from narcissists. You can walk away from anybody. Um, and I'm the narcissist in one or two stories, and I'm not a narcissist. But if you pour alcohol on top of people pleasing, what you get is narcissism. Um, so when I was a drunk, I was a narcissist. Um, and so I think that's an important concept. So remember, guys, that you don't have to hate your life in order to want better. And you don't have to, and not everybody has to suck in order for you to want to be a part of it, right? Or for you to not want to be a part of it. So it's not like, so Cindy, I'm not questioning whether the person you were with was a narcissist or not. I'm kind of riffing off that idea, but and you're going to feel guilty. And again, you may not actually feel guilty for walking away. What I think you're feeling is sadness that it didn't work, and and that's normal, right? So normal is normal, right? Like everybody everybody has things that they won't enjoy, right? So that's just part of it. And if there's people in your life, see, oh, this person, so this is a great example, would shout at me if I disagreed with her and various other extreme behaviors. So you have somebody that's emotionally unstable. It, or were they narcissistic? I don't know. I mean, I can't speak to that, but feeling guilty from walking away, I don't think is accurate. I think what you're feeling is lonely, or you're feeling sad, or you miss that person for some reason or another, and that's okay, right? Um, the only other way to deal with a narcissist, of course, is to gray rock, which is not effective in most cases because it requires extremely good boundaries, and most people who have extremely good boundaries don't want to communicate with narcissists anyway, right? So, if this is not a person to whom you are fundamentally connected, like a spouse that you have to raise kids with, um, just I wouldn't worry about it, right? Like, how lonely are you that you want that person in your life? I doubt it's that lonely. So, moving on, Judy. How long did it take to love yourself in order to be able to recognize boundaries you want and need? uh, 41 years, um, plus or minus. um, So you start your journey where you start your journey. Some people are in their 40s, some people are in their 50s, some people are in their 20s. Um, the variance is real. So I don't think you have to be any age, and I don't think it takes a lot of time. I don't think I think it comes when it comes. That's a very people pleaser question. It's like, so this is another one of the key core concepts of people pleasing is that they're generally speaking all or nothing. Like I'm either going to be a pleaser or I'm going to be a jerk. I'm either going to be this or I'm going to be that. Right. I'm either going to drink or I'm not going to drink. It's always some sort of extreme. Right. So if, like, you want me to tell you like this is the starting point and then this is the ending point, I don't have an answer to that, right? Because you could figure out here, you could figure it out here, you could figure it out here, you could figure it out here, or you could never figure it out at all. It's entirely up to you, right? I can tell you that you will accelerate that if you join my Boundary Boot Camp. Um, but that's about all I can say about that. Let's see. Boundary Boot Camp grad here. Oh, Laura, it's good to see you. You're the best. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you showing up again. That's so cool. Thank you for being here. Um, Roxy, I don't see the remainder of that question, so I don't know what you're saying. Um, Cindy, you're welcome. Rob, you're back. How do you learn to not feel guilty for not wanting to help someone who won't help themselves? I always end up helping, feeling like a sucker. Well, first, let's change. So if you're helping somebody that doesn't want to help themselves, that's not the word we use. There's a word for that. It's called enablement, right? And enablement is just a wild lack of boundaries. Um, Listen, guys, you're going to feel bad. Like, how did we get to the place where everybody thought that they weren't supposed to feel bad? Like, you're going to feel bad. This is life. Sometimes that happens. The deal is that you can't create the life you want if you don't allow that, right? Um, Sometimes setting boundaries feel like shit. Sometimes saying no feels like shit. So, like, I should write an entire chapter on this, but like, having boundaries isn't always going to feel good. Not being a being a people pleaser feels great until it doesn't, right? So you're not going to always feel awesome about this, right? Well, how do I get over feeling guilty? What if you don't feel guilty, but at least your life is getting better, right? So just an important kind of delineator to remember that like not everything's going to feel good. In fact, most things won't, especially when you're doing the hard work. Ah, Rob, you signed up for Boundary Boot Camp. Awesome. Thanks, man. I look forward to seeing you. Let's see. How to be okay bold. Wait, how to be okay being bold on socials about what you believe in and when it goes about the status quo. Ooh. Well, as you might know, I'm a person that has a tendency to overstep on social media and piss off a lot of people. Um, by the way, guys, if you ever want to stop people pleasing, if you ever want to really like do it, just start a social media channel and start talking about what you feel. You'll get real comfortable with other people hating you real quick. I get as many hate mail as I do great comments. I appreciate both, but Ramana, the best thing you can do is just create, 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 and then you'll eventually get over it. It's just like boundaries, guys. There's one core concept that I think is really important that I haven't touched on today, which is you get good at anything you practice, including not practicing. So if you decide that you want to be happy, if you decide you want to do boundaries, then you're going to have to get okay with being uncomfortable, right? So, all that said, I've pretty much gone through everything we have today, which is pretty exciting. I managed to knock that out a lot faster. So, tomorrow's going to be a little bit longer, I think. I have a couple of things I need to go through to make sure that we do this correctly, but let me double check a thing. I'm going to put us on a quick intermission because I said I was going to do that, and I will be right back. Can you hear me now? So as we were, here I am, Nick Pollard, people displeaser. I am back. Um, so if you're watching the course and you are in the StreamYard, or if you have signed up for Rebellion, which I'm going to put that back down here so you can see it, pop in there right now because there is a test I would like everybody to take. It's not necessarily a test; it's a quiz. It is how much of a pleaser are you? One of the things that we really value in my work is understanding, and assessing like how pleasing am I? How much does this impact me? So questions like, in terms of behaviors and tactics. Sometimes I say yes to requests even when I want to say no. I often go out of my way to avoid conflict. I frequently put others. So there's all these things in here in this test that I'd like you to go and take a look at. And you can do that by accessing the course, which we emailed you a bunch of different times. So if you're in the course now and you haven't done that, so pop in there. Perfect. Laura knows exactly how to do it. That's a great way to get into the Boundary Boot Camp. You also should have gotten an email from us. Hop in and take a look. Judy, thank you for signing up. I'm excited. Joel, I'm glad to hear that. So, guys, hop into. Let me put up the course link. Let's see. Log in. So to take the quiz, you're going to go to login.thepeopledispleaser.com. Dan, I don't know how to help you. You should have gotten that. Login.thepeopledispleaser.com. So here's where I want you to go to take the test. I'll put it in here right now. Right. So pop in there, take the test. I'm going to run and do one more intermission second here, and then we will close out for the day. Just kind of wrapping up what we've talked about already. So all that said, pop in, take the test. Let me know how it goes. I will be looking forward to the comments and how exciting. All right. Ta-da. Welcome back, friends. Shelly, you go to the link that's posted here where it says login.thepeopledispleaser.com. It's going to give you a test. It's under assessments in the first part of the day. So, what I want to do now, friends, we'll just pull something up here while we're sitting here thinking. Um, if you have any more questions about boundaries or people pleasing, go ahead and ask. Now is a good time. But I want to do one thing first. How'd you guys like my video on rudderless kids? It got me in some trouble. I don't know if you guys know, but I don't hate getting in trouble. So, to wrap up our day today, I want to tell you a little bit about Boundary Bootcamp, what we're going to learn in that, and how it all shows up. So, just to give you an idea, so you can take a look inside the course, let me present to you. Here's the link. The link is linking right below where it says, where's the link? We're going to do. All right, friends. I want you to be able to see what I'm talking about here. So inside of our Boundary Bootcamp, which is really exciting for me, I'm really excited I get to do it again because it's one of my favorite things to do. I always end up crying when I do it though, because I do really love it. But I want to show you what it looks like inside the course so you have an idea. If you want to sign up for that, I'll put up the, there you go. So then we'll change our screen here. But so inside of the Boundary Bootcamp is what I want you to see. There it is. So as you can see, inside of our coursework, we've got our typical introductions. Every single week is going to have a video where we have all the slide presentations and all the videos. We have every single one of the skill sets that we learn every single week within the Boundary Bootcamp. By the way, if you've logged into Rebellion, How to Stop People Pleasing, it's going to look exactly like this. We put a lot of work into Rebellion. We put a lot of work into Boundary Bootcamp as well. But one of the things that you're going to see in every single week is the homework. And I won't tell you what the homework is, but trust me when I tell you that the experiences that I'm going to make you go through are going to be something that really changes the way you show up, right? And every single week is designed to push you further and further into this new kind of acclimated person. And then we go through all of these things, understanding how to learn our boundaries, internal and external. We go through how to be assertive rather than an asshole. It's one of my favorite weeks. And then we get into probably the most important part of this, which is your boundary bill of rights. This living document is really about how do you identify your value systems? How do you identify what you're allowed to be, what you're not allowed to be? And then how do you then put that into boundaries, which is taking that bill of rights and making that about you, right? So I wanted you to see that just so you kind of had an idea of what we're working with when we talk about Boundary Bootcamp, because it's probably one of the most important products that I've put out in my lifetime. So that said, let me pull that down if I can figure out how to do that and answer some more questions. All right. When do you decide to step away from family members who overstep your boundaries all the time? When do you decide? Well, it's a good question. I think too many people make that decision lightly. I know I certainly did, and I paid for it pretty dearly. So here's the thing: when we think about boundaries, a lot of this boils down to some of the core concepts within this are, and they all kind of repeat themselves. But if you have like boundaries and no boundaries, right? This is good, right? This is, having boundaries is not bad. Having no boundaries is bad, right? That's kind of how we see it. My question is always like, somebody asked me that, and I always want to know, like, what boundary did they overstep, right? So, Rob, 29 times. You got some tests in there. At a point. I love these answers. 29. Um, so no contact is like if we build this as like we'll do it like a thermometer, right? So we'll just kind of it's a thermometer, right? And then like this is no contact. My question is like, how did you get here on this platform, right? But when we're talking about doing no contact, there's an idea in there that I play with a lot, and I'm still trying to figure out how to articulate it in a more meaningful way. But why don't you just turn the volume down on the relationship? Like, why does everybody have to be on or off, right? So I have experiences with my family members. Many of them, a couple of them I don't speak with. I have gone no contact with a few people in my life. Um, but relationships aren't, they don't have to be on or off. You can just turn the volume down. You can limit your interactions. You can limit the time you spend. Like your mom, for instance, like if it's your mom that's overstepping your boundaries, probably not going to change. So you have to learn to accept her or not, and then learn to be a casual observer of the experience rather than so judgmental as to whether or not. Um, uh, hey, Kevin, you're in the seminar. So you can go to login.thepeopledispleaser.com, Kevin, and it will direct you to the course if you want to get in there. So back to your question, Karen or Nell Karen. I don't know how to say your last name. I'm going to butcher that. I think a lot of people go no contact entirely too quickly, and the result of that is they end up ruining their relationships. Um, Not everybody is going to like it. I mean, just because you decided to start setting boundaries and changing doesn't mean everybody else was prepared for that. And so you kind of have to give some grace, but at the same time, like there are some people that you need to go no contact with. But if it's like a lot of them, that's not a them. That's a you problem. So just as a thought, Mikhail or Michael, how can you reconnect with people who were once important to you after experiencing burnout? After years of struggling with addiction and people pleasing, finally got sober. 326 days. What? Go get it. Um, However, I realized that spending time with my friends feels exhausting without the help of substances, even though they're lovely people. um, um, this is tough. Um, oh, Joel 49. Ouch. Um, that's a test score, buddy. You can't hang out with people that are doing the things you used to do. When I quit drinking, one of the hardest things I ever realized was like that the people I was hanging out with were all drunks, and if I wanted to not be a drunk, then I had to stop doing that. And so when your entire relationship circle functions around substance abuse, then you have to move on from that initially. And then how do you reconnect with people that were once important to you? Well, I think that's easier said. I think it's easier if you didn't burn them and you're burnt out. If you burned a bunch of people, then they don't trust you anymore. So you have to earn their trust and you have to be willing to be patient. Um, I say this a lot, like addicts get sober very quickly and then they think they deserve their kids back. And the answer is they don't, right? Or, addicts get sober and they wonder why their mom doesn't trust them anymore. Well, because you were a dick for 10 years. Um, so, like, sobriety on its own isn't enough. 326 days is badass, though, dude. So keep doing that, whatever you're doing. It sounds like it's working. And if you're trying to get sober and you're watching this, we're with you. It's it's a tough road, but it can be done, and good for you. Got some high scores today. Look at that. We got a 29. Rob, it looks like you're the winner. If this was golf anyway. Um, Yikes. So we've had some big scores on the test here. You can get that by going to login.thepeopledispleaser.com. And you'll find more information there. You'll also be able to get this course, you'll get the recordings, and I will be emailing out the video links as well. So all that said, guys, that's all I have to cover for today. I want to make sure that I still have some stuff to go over tomorrow. I'm really excited. So we're going to start tomorrow with increasing self confidence. Let me go back to our thing here. Let me go all the way back to slide number one. I'm sorry. So tomorrow we're going to go back. We're going to go into increasing self confidence, strengthening our assertiveness, and taking control. So what I hope you guys got from today, just as we kind of part each other's company, I hope that you learned how to recognize the people pleasing behaviors you have. I put the test in the coursework so you'd be able to get in there and do it, and I think that that will help you a lot, right? And then through that, I hope that you're able to enhance your self awareness. And today, I really hope that you got a good idea of what it looks like to set healthy boundaries, or at least to have an idea of healthy boundaries, right? Because boundaries, again, is one of my most favorite things to talk about, um, are the key to your personal growth. It is the way that you will achieve everything in your life. It's by saying no, it's by understanding what's valuable to you, it's by understanding what's not valuable to you. And that's how you're going to move on and how you're going to create the life that you want. So I'm super proud of you guys for showing up. Thank you for being here. The recording will be available in about 2 hours. I should be able to get that uploaded to the course, and we'll send you a login link for that as well. So I look forward to having you. Thanks for being here.